Welcome everyone. I hope you've had the opportunity to read our passage for today first of all. So if you haven't, just duck out, go and read Acts 27:1 to 28:14 and then come back and have a listen to this. We're actually going to have a talk in two parts today. So in our Sunday services it'll be in two separate parts of the service, but for you watching online I'll do part one. Probably have about a 10-second pause while I change hats, metaphorically, and then we'll do part two. So it'll all make sense as we get going. So, assuming you've read the passage, part one. Welcome, my name is Agapus and I'm a sailor. You won't remember my name and that's okay because this story is not about me, but it'd be good to give you a little bit of a background first of all. I sail the grain run from Alexandria to Rome. It's really important work, especially given all the famines we've been having recently. That grain matters. Anyway, I want to tell you a story about one such journey. Most of my journeys are pretty mundane, but this one I will never forget. We'd come from Egypt and we'd made it to the port of Myra in Lycia. And we took on some new passengers. It was a group of Roman soldiers and some prisoners. It was all led by a centurion. This wasn't uncommon. Roman soldiers could jump on board whatever vessel they like, and bringing along prisoners was also pretty common because Rome wanted a lot of prisoners for their games. We had a nickname for prisoners. We used to call them lion bait. Anyway, it was about another 5 weeks sailing until we got to Rome. And that's if everything went good. And it definitely did not. But I'll come to that. One of the prisoners that came on board with the soldiers, I noticed. And that's unusual because you just don't notice the prisoners. They're there. I can't quite tell what it was, but he was treated differently by the soldiers. He was called Paul. And he seemed to have a couple of friends with him. Couldn't tell if they were prisoners or maybe serving Paul. That wasn't uncommon either. Anyway, I found out Paul was a Roman citizen. That was a bit of a surprise. He was a prisoner. I found out he was on his way to see the emperor, to stand in front of the emperor. That was a huge shock. I found out that he'd been a prisoner of the Romans for quite some time. Obviously, they seemed to know him and they treated him with quite a lot of respect. Clearly, he hadn't given them that much trouble. Well, we set sail, we left port, and we eventually came to a place called Fair Havens, another port. Sort of a funny name. Wasn't my favourite place. It wasn't very big. Actually wasn't that good to berth at for too long either. And we were keen to move on and get to a bigger port because the end of the sailing season, it was fast approaching. Don't get me wrong, you could sail whenever you wanted to. But you would be a fool to sail in winter. It was just far too dangerous. The Romans were offering us really good bounties to get the grain to Rome, but we had to keep asking ourselves, was it worth it? I'd already lost a few mates trying to get there when they shouldn't have been sailing. Well, it was at Fair Havens that I first heard Paul speak. And it was a warning. And I heard him telling everyone not to go on. And if we went on, if we left that port, it was going to be disastrous. Well, what would he know? He wasn't a sailor. Although I'll give him his due, he did seem to know his way around the ship. I knew if we pressed on, we might make it up the coast a bit. Next best port was Phoenix, about 50 miles away. And that was a much better place to berth for winter and stay for 3 months or so. And obviously the Roman soldiers thought so. And the ship's captain said, good idea, let's go. So we went. How we wish we listened to Paul right back then. About 6 miles out from Fair Havens, we got hit by this howler. It was so strong we couldn't do anything. We're unable to sail straight into a breeze and this one just took us and it kept going and going and going. We had to pull up the lifeboat, normally trails behind us. We had to run ropes under the ship just to hold the thing together. The wind was so strong. After a day or so, we thought, we're going to have to dump some cargo. So we started dumping as much cargo as we could overboard. We just had to stay afloat. After 2 days, and this shows how desperate we were, we threw all of our spare tackle overboard, spare sails, everything like that. We had to get lighter. But the storm just kept going and going day after day. Not that we could tell it was day. It was so dark. We didn't see the sun. We didn't see the stars. We had no idea where we were. Now, I've been on the water for a lot of years, and even I gave up hope. Everyone gave up hope. I couldn't eat. No one could eat. We were just desperate. And that's when Paul spoke again. And I remember each one of those words. He said this, he said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and this loss." Yeah, I guess we deserve that. We should have listened to him. But to be fair, it wasn't Paul saying, "I told you so." It was Paul saying, "You really need to listen now to what I'm going to say." And so he kept talking. And he said something like, "Keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed." Whew. Apparently, Paul had seen an angel who had spoken to him and who had promised him these things. I've got to say, I like that. We needed some help from the gods at this point. And that helped us a bit. It gave us a bit of courage. Paul was so confident. And so we kept fighting the wind. We kept fighting the waves. The guy said we'd survive if we just had courage. What have I got to lose? Although he did go on and talk about the ship running aground and the ship being sunk, and I must admit I didn't like the sound of that too much. Anyway, I think it was 14 days and nights that passed, and that was the longest 14 days of my life. But eventually we sensed that land was approaching. We were getting blown somewhere. Sailor's instinct. We knew something was happening, and so we started checking the depth, and sure enough, it started getting shallower. But that gave us another problem, of course, and the problem was we weren't in control of the ship, and it would be very easy for that storm just to blow us straight onto rocks and destroy us all. So we dropped some anchors to try and slow us down a bit. We were hoping to make it to daylight. At least in daylight you can see where you are, and you've got a bit of a chance. But a few of my mates couldn't wait. They were so terrified that they thought we're better off in the little boat and rather than the big boat. So they were about to hop in the lifeboat and get going, but Paul was onto it. I don't know how he knew, but he was onto it. And he told the centurion that everyone on the boat would perish if we let these sailors leave. I don't know if he meant because of what the angel had told him or just because we couldn't afford to lose any of the ship's crew. I'm really not sure. But whatever the case, the soldiers listened to Paul and they cut the lifeboat loose. Look, I can't say I blame my mates. I was pretty angry with them, but we were all scared to death by then. But them leaving would have left us in a heap of trouble. But now we didn't have a lifeboat either. We were all in this together. I can't believe how much the soldiers actually listened to Paul, cutting that lifeboat loose. Well, we made it to dawn. And that's when Paul spoke to everyone again, probably the third time or something like that. And it was pretty simple. Paul said to us all, "You're all going to survive. And now it's time to eat something." And to show us that he meant it, Paul ate. All right, why not? So we all ate. And I'll confess, we felt a bit better after that. It was still dangerous, but at this point I was happy to believe Paul. I was happy to trust what he said. We were going to survive. And then sure enough, we make it to daylight and we see this sandy beach in the distance. So we make a beeline for that sandy beach. But this really was not our trip. We're heading to that beach. We're starting to cross the breakers when we just hit a sandbank and we get completely stuck. This is not good. The waves start battering our ship, and I could tell pretty clearly the old boat just wasn't going to last much longer. It had already been pounded. Well, at least we were close enough to jump over and swim and make it to shore. But the soldiers, well, they were worried that some of the prisoners would do that and then escape. And that wasn't good. Well, and you know, if I was one of the prisoners, I'd do exactly the same thing in their situation. But unfortunately, the soldiers couldn't let that happen, and soldiers' plan A is kill. They were going to kill all the prisoners, because if they let any of them escape, then often the punishment for them was they'd have to pay for it with their own life. Fortunately for the prisoners, the centurion stepped in and told the soldiers to spare all the prisoners. Do you know why he did it? Because he did not want to see Paul killed. I've never seen a centurion behave like that before. They're not exactly known for being nice guys. Well, everyone jumped over and everyone made it to shore, just as Paul said it would happen. Everyone. 276 of us, even those that couldn't swim. That is unbelievable. There is really something different about this man, Paul. So really what happened next didn't actually surprise me that much. We're on land, and what should happen to Paul? But he gets bitten by a viper. Nasty, nasty. What happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No effect on him. This isn't normal. And then all the people of the island start bringing their sick to Paul so that he can heal them. And he's healing them. Well, I've got to say, it made our stay a whole lot more pleasant, because we stayed on this island, Malta it was. We stayed there for 3 months, and we were really well looked after by the locals while we were there. Well, after that, I got a ticket on another Alexandrian ship that pulled over, and I jumped on along with Paul, along with the prisoners, along with the soldiers. And finally, we made it to Rome about 3 weeks after leaving Malta. Well, as I think about it, I don't think we ever would have got there without Paul. He was just sure, he was just so sure that he would stand before the emperor. It just rubbed off on us all. It gave us courage, it gave us hope. We just kept going. You know, I've never been that much into the gods. I've made a few sacrifices in my time, but I just don't think they do that much. But Paul seemed so sure about his God, so confident about how things were going to work out. And they did. Never in doubt. Even the Romans, with all their might and all of their gods, respected this man. They couldn't save us, but he seemed to. They knew there was something different about him, something different about this God he worshipped. Well, that was the end of that journey. I'm going back to sea now. It's what I do. It's what I know how to do. But I'm pretty sure that my life is never going to be the same again. Part 2. Well, friends, the question I want to ask, and these are questions we should ask at any time we read the Bible, is what changes for you as a result of this story? What do you learn about God? What changes might this bring to how you live this week? Because on one level, this is simply a story that Luke is recounting about a stormy shipwreck on the way to Rome. On one level. But on another level, of course, Luke is doing so much more. What did he have in mind? What was he thinking when he recorded this hazardous journey? In fact, what did Luke have in mind when he wrote his 2 volumes, Gospel of Luke and the Acts? Luke chapter 1 verse 4, right at the start. He writes so that his friend Theophilus, and by extension us, may know the certainty of the things we have been taught. And then secondly, Acts 1:8, sort of a summary verse for Acts. Luke writes to show the fulfilment of the story of Jesus going out into all the world. You see, Acts isn't about Paul. Acts is about Jesus, and it's about witnesses doing what Jesus has commanded them to do, to tell everyone what they have seen, what they have heard, what they know. And our story today fits into that. Our story isn't anything to do with navigating the storms of life. It's about trusting God in the good and the bad, knowing that He is working His purposes out, knowing that He is sending His word out, and it's about faithfully playing our part in that. I just want to finish with 6 brief thoughts that flesh out that idea. First one, Paul is a brilliant example for us of someone obeying God's will no matter how hard it gets. Obeying God's will no matter how hard it gets. Take courage from that and persevere. I've seen plenty of people begin ministries, maybe mission work, maybe even full-time service for God, but once they're taken out of their comfort zone, it just becomes a bit too hard, they stop. God's work is hard work. It's spiritual work, so you're opposed. It's people work. So at times there will be frustrations and disappointments, but it's eternal work. It matters. It makes more of a difference than anything else in the world. We are all part of doing work that bears fruit into eternity. It'll be hard, but it matters. And so trust in God's purposes and work hard for the Lord. And by the way, nothing will bring you greater joy than doing the Lord's work. Second thing, be confident that that same divine hand that was watching over Paul, that was guiding Paul, is the same as the one who orders and guides our lives. Even though the circumstances looked bad, God knew what He was doing with Paul. Even in our hard times, God knows what He is doing with our lives and our work. Keep trusting. Thirdly, it wasn't just Paul's proclamation that had an impact. It was Paul's whole life and what he was like. That doesn't actually always happen for someone that testifies about Jesus, but it happens here. From the Romans, there is an appreciation, a trust, a respect. I mean, imagine a centurion choosing to spare prisoners to save one person. Consider Felix and Festus and Agrippa from our previous weeks. It would have been so simple for them to please Paul's accusers and just get rid of him. But there was something special about this man, something different. And so for us, brothers and sisters, may your life and my life stand out. Be obviously different. Stand out because we are Christ's ambassadors, because we bear His name. Fourthly, God can be taken at His word. Trust His word. Trust what He says. God told Paul he would reach Rome. God told Paul no lives would be lost. God told Paul the ship would run aground. God's word can be trusted because God can be trusted. Fifthly, God's good purposes for His people are so often fulfilled in the context of suffering and hostility, and occasionally even storms at sea. And yet in the midst of that, there is a certainty of triumph. There is a certainty of the fulfillment of the purposes of a sovereign God. Finally, friends, the author of Acts ultimately is God. the one in control of all of these things. That same author is the one who has authored your life. He is the one who knows your name. He is the one who gave up his son for you. He is the one who was with Joseph in prison, who was with Daniel in the lion's den, who was with Paul in the storm. And he promises that he is always with his children, whom he has purchased with his blood, whom he has adopted, whom he has cast his affections on. God is always with us. Let me pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, your purposes will work out. Your word will go out. Your people are never alone. You are the Lord Almighty. Please encourage our hearts to be faithful to your will, no matter how hard it gets, for you are always with us. Amen.